Chapter 11 First Class 2 You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Hearing the teacher's voice who was standing in the middle of the stage in that amphitheater, Lowther turned to her with a look of curiosity. Is there a problem? That woman's eyes sharpened as she noticed the positioning of this young newcomer. What is your name? Are you by any chance a new student? Oh. Do I have to introduce myself? He asked aloud, looking around, surprised at that. Well, this is a room full of children. That shouldn't be strange. He looked again at that woman dressed in an outfit very similar to those worn by stewardesses in his last world and said. Well, my name is Lowther Ritter, but you can just call me Lowther. And yes, I am new here, but don't bother introducing yourselves to me. I won't be staying long in this place, so I will hardly remember your names. He said, looking at where the children in that place were. How arrogant. Who is this idiot? Murmurs spread through there as the young people began to look strangely at Lowther. At the same time, the teacher stood watching him with her mouth open, enjoying the sight of this new student who was self-sabotaging his social situation. How can someone be such an idiot? Does he think he's a genius? She wondered, startled by his ordinary behavior. Young people his age are already at least in Sector Point 3, but he starts in Sector Point 1 saying that. Now, dear teacher, may I sit down? Or is there something else you want to know? I don't mind personal questions. He said, standing between the stage and the row of seats, waiting for that woman's answer. This boy. She shook her hands and said. Call me Miss Coke, and yes, you may sit down. But since this is your first day here, try to follow the class with one of your classmates. Lowther then headed toward the place he wanted to sit before, where there was a small group of beautiful women. Looking at those women who must have been between 16 and 19, he waved at them, smiling, and sat down next to a redhead, who was just as pretty as Elise. Hi, you wouldn't mind if I follow the class with you, right? He sat down next to her and said this in a quiet tone, looking her in the eye in an eye contact that few would attempt in the first contact. I. She stammered, turning her eyes away from his with embarrassment. You can. By the way, what should I call you? He smiled at her. Elka. Elka, call me Lowther. I'll probably adapt quickly to this place, but being around someone like you might make me want to stay here longer. That. The woman's face turned red at hearing that, experiencing such an explicit situation like that for the first time in her life. She was only 17, the age at which humans in this world became adults. Because of this, and also due to her beauty, she had never experienced a situation where a man was so direct with her. She had several suitors, many of them in this class. However, none of them dared to come directly to her, even just to sit next to her. Consequently, she was surprised to hear Lowther's words as she observed this young man's incomparable countenance. He. Her lips formed a discreet smile, and without realizing it, a graceful laugh reached the ears of those in her surroundings. After this, Lowther moved a little closer to her and began to look at Elka's books on a stand that existed in front of each seat in such an amphitheater. As he did so, he leaned sideways while quickly using one of his hands to touch the upper middle of that young woman's back while supporting himself. Elka, would you mind lending me one of those other books? He used his other hand to point in the direction of an open bag on the floor. That was the cultivation world, but spatial items were not so common and cheap to the point that even low-level people had independent spaces to carry books. No, even if some of those students had storage items, such a thing certainly could not store many cubic centimeters. Therefore, they would never carry books in spatial devices, as it would be much more interesting to have medicine and emergency resources in them. So, everyone in that class had bags or backpacks, like the one at Elka's feet. Yes, but wouldn't you rather attend class? She asked in a low voice, not bothered by Lowther's touch. It might be more interesting for you to catch up on the weeks of your delay at another time. Is that so? He smiled, saying softly in Elka's left ear. Perhaps you would like me to follow this class very closely. Gulp. No, that's not why. Oh. Too bad. Lothar removed his hand from her back with the same expression on his face as before, finally bending down and picking up the book that had the name Geopolitics. In her bag. Don't worry. I'll finish reading it before class is over. Noticing Lothar's movement, Elka felt strange by the change in his behavior, which had gone from a warm person to a cold one in a matter of seconds. Did I do something wrong? She wondered quietly, looking sideways at Lothar's face, curious. And while Lothar was reading that book, Elka watched him every 2 or 3 minutes, seeing how focused he was, totally ignoring her presence there. Why don't you look at me? Are you pretending to concentrate just to tease me? She began to feel nervous, watching that young man change pages every 30 seconds. This situation was extraordinary for her. After all, right now, while Lothar was standing next to her, reading that book focused, more than a dozen young men were watching her from afar. And she obviously knew this since every woman had this divine sense of noticing the eyes watching them. However, the young man closest to her, who could take the opportunity to talk to her and try to get closer, was ignoring her. That was incredibly annoying. She then moved a little closer to him, running one of her hands through her hair to get his attention. However, Lothar was not doing any of this on purpose. Or rather, he knew how his actions could influence those around him, but his goal there was not to provoke Elka, although that would be good for him. No, he was just focused on the content of that book while using his speed reading technique, something he had learned in his previous life. That was the first book about this world Lothar had read, and as he learned some basic information, he could not ignore the feeling of satisfaction that came with the knowledge he was accumulating. With that book, he had already discovered that Peter's city was actually the largest city of Lin province, one of the 10 regions of Leopoldine. Leopoldine was a large state ruled by an imperial family of the same name. That was an ancient power that almost 2,000 years ago had brought the 10 then independent regions together into a centralized government. But even if Leopoldine was as large as the Europe of Lothar's previous world, this place had less than 30 million inhabitants and was surrounded by 4 other empires and a few kingdoms. Each of them with populations as large or even larger than the one of this state. And precisely because of this empire was constantly involved in conflicts with outside powers, trying to regain or take new territories. Leopoldine did not have a passage to the sea, so from time to time, wars took place. After all, having to cross borders could be very costly. How could overtaxed goods from a state not unlike its neighbors with access to the sea compete in the continental market? That was a problem. But Lothar did not delve too deeply into the external affairs of this state. No, there was not much information in that introductory book on the subject. So, he had soon begun to learn more about Lin province, the learning focus for the young beginners at this academy. Chapter 12 First Class 3 You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Lin province was in the northernmost part of Leopoldine, with about 4 million inhabitants and an economy based on the exploitation of commodities. That might be the cultivation world, but the vast majority of the people in this world were just individuals unable to cultivate, as must have been the case with the past Lothar. Consequently, the mainland economy relied heavily on ordinary resources, food items, or those needed to produce low-level spiritual equipment such as lamps. Because of this factor, the currency used in this world was not the infamous spiritual crystals, items used in cultivation. No, although a spiritual crystal had the qualities sought after in a currency, such as scarcity and high value, the currency used throughout this world needed to be simpler. Otherwise, it would be complicated to capture and distribute resources among ordinary people. Not only this, these resources could be used for cultivation, something that further decreased their circulation. With this, the continental economy used a standard that mainly relied on 3 types of coins. These were the bronze, silver, and gold coins, with 1 gold worth 10 silver or 100 bronze coins. And even if it was challenging to buy spiritual crystals with these common coins, this did not make this economic model impossible for the great cultivators of this world. The coins were just as important to them as to the ordinary people of this world. Spiritual crystals were mined items, which could be done with ordinary labor, using, of course, the right tools. On the other hand, even spiritual tools produced by cultivators needed commodities that ordinary people could also produce or mine. The same thing for food and basically all the primary sectors found in any civilization, such as construction. But these workers had to be paid something in return, even if it was food, right? Slavery existed in some parts of this world. Still, not all states on this continent, Concordia, used it because enslaved people did not shop. So, there was a great need for standard currencies, even for high-level cultivators, since, indirectly, common currencies produced spiritual crystals. Consequently, the standard economy, the production of mere commodities in Lin province, was crucial for local cultivators. Because of this, Lothar soon understood some of the social-political dynamics of Peter's city, where, although House Frost was the strongest, several other powers were competing with this family. In this place, there was an organization that governed the province on behalf of House Leopoldine, another organization that governed the city, and finally, some competing families in local businesses. In addition to these local powers, there were institutions in this place directly affiliated to the imperial family, as in the case of the academy that Lothar was in at this very moment. However, these powers were much more neutral around here and rarely got involved in the affairs of the local nobility. Understanding all this, Lothar found himself in a place full of political problems that he, a son-in-law of the Frost family, could hardly escape. Sigh. Looks like I'll have a more complicated start than I had assumed. He finally took his eyes off the words in Elka's book, closing it and considering his future. Victoria married me because she has some interest in being married to me. However, there was no advantage to her marrying the city good. Nothing. Maybe she was simply using me because I have no talent and would probably never try to usurp the power of the Frost family. That must be the case unless, of course, Lothar's late guardian had some shocking secret to force this marriage. But this is unlikely. I think. He pondered, ignoring his surroundings. Never mind. In one case or another, I'll be drawn into some kind of political confrontation. Shit. He cursed his luck in a low voice, attracting Elka's attention. Did you say something? He then looked at Elka's pretty face and stood silent for a second. I have to learn more about this world, especially about cultivation. I also need to get a method to build a comfortable position that will allow me to leave the Frost family in the future. Elka, why don't you show me Sector Point 1? I want to find this place library and other areas with certain information of interest to me. Perhaps we can have tea after that. Elka's eyes then opened in surprise. Are you asking me out on a date? Sure, why not? He smiled, looking at her lips and then back into her eyes. How old are you? 17, great. Do you have a boyfriend? No. She replied with her face flushed. He just met me, and already he wants to go out with me. He's very bold if he thinks I'll make it so easily. But I don't know if that's a good idea. Oh. Then it's okay. He stood up from where he was standing, preparing to leave. Shall we? Lothar said as he waved one of his hands at Elka. By now, the first class of the day was over, and several people in the surroundings of that amphitheater were slowly leaving the place. At the same time, the teacher had already disappeared. Amidst the noise of simultaneous conversations in that area, Elka looked intensely into Lothar's eyes, feeling strange at this moment. But we're not going to have a date, but you can still show me this place, right? Hearing this, she was speechless and just raised one of her hands towards that young man, using it to stand up. He's truly confident. If it were one of those others, he'd probably be red with embarrassment and run away from me. She looked discreetly at some of her observers, giving Lowther's behavior credit. She then turned to her friends and said, "Hey, I will help student Lowther get to know our sector. So, see you later." "Oh. You're going to do that? Looks like he doesn't just have looks, huh? Just by having exchanged a few words with you, and you already." A blonde girl was about to say this, laughing, when that redhead made a disgruntled expression and turned away from her friends. "You've got it wrong. I will only help a new student. Nothing more. Come on, Lowther." She said this after picking up her bag and walking ahead of him. Meanwhile, several eyes watched those two leaving that area, feeling wronged that such an arrogant person had been privileged to leave accompanied by the beautiful Elka. "So, that's that ranking I heard earlier, huh?" Lowther said this to Elka as he observed a large tower in the central part of Sector Point 1. After leaving the previous amphitheater, these two had walked for several minutes around Sector Point 1, with Elka introducing the most relevant places to Lowther. To begin with, they had passed in front of the library in this area, where all students were free to use it. Next, Elka introduced Lowther to the local cafeteria, a restaurant, the mission hall, and the business area of this sector. At the Morning Star Academy, students and even teachers had the possibility to exchange, sell or buy items within this institution. Teachers naturally had better items, while students constantly went on missions and got new ones. And with the wealth that some of the students of this institution had, all kinds of business could take place in the specific areas for this. Anyway, Lowther had been interested in that place. Still, as he did not have many belongings, he made a mental note about such an area before getting to know the central square of Sector Point 1. This place, which had gardens and what looked like a giant obelisk in its center, was where the ranking of the students of this institution was. As he came face to face with it, Lowther felt in awe of this place's people. The competition here seems amazing. They actually rank even the last places. He thought of this as he looked at his name, which at the moment was in position 4568. Is that a way of encouragement? He looked at that in silence, remembering that there were only two kinds of pain. One was that which hurt, and one that transformed. In this case, showing the world your mediocrity could be considered a way to put great weight on a naive's shoulders, pressing the immature young people, as was the case with most of the new students there. The humiliated would change or give up. In any case, the cultivation world would prevail. Either the world would gain new people with the will to do what was necessary, who understood the wicked way of this world, or it would lose those who would only waste the limited resources. As Lowther thought about it, he felt that this place despised the weak and glorified the strong. This world is much wilder than Earth. I cannot expect words of justice here. Whoever has the bigger hand in a given matter will definitely win in the end, and no one will care about the losing side. This is revealing. You think so? Elka asked in interest, watching this young man's left face, feeling that perhaps his words had a greater meaning. Of course. He smiled at her as he stared her in the face. What is your position, Elka? A slight blush appeared on her face, and she said in a low voice. 4.4510. I see. Most of the students in Sector Point 1 must be in those final positions. Don't you think it's bad that we have to be exposed like this? I know that most of us have only been here a short time and will naturally rise as time goes on. But not everyone wants that kind of exposure. It's true. Lowther noticed the discontent of that woman beside him. He then took one of her hands and said. But this is just a test, Elka. Once you reach a certain temperament, these tests lose their meaning. But tell me one thing. Is there any advantage to having good positions in that ranking? Chapter 13 Ranking Advantages. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Hearing Lowther's question, Elka put her embarrassment for the lousy position she was in aside and answered him. Yes. Between rank 501 and 1000, students can apply for common positions within our academy. For example, Miss Koch, our teacher, is actually a student in Sector Point 4. But since she is between those positions, she has the right to apply for ordinary teaching positions. And she has won a competition for that position, so she is our geopolitics teacher. With that, she earns a professor's salary while getting access to better sectors, even though she's still in Sector Point 4. Between positions 201 and 500, students get personal counseling with the Academy's cultivation teachers once a week. That was a great advantage because not all the students at this institution were from large noble houses. On the contrary, several of them were from emerging institutions that had not yet achieved an excellent background for their cultivators to have an understanding good enough to help the new generations. And since this academy's students were only entitled to generic classes focused on the basics of each part of cultivation, that opportunity could be significantly crucial for the humble nobles of this place. At the very least, they could save many crystals, the currency used in this kind of business, and still avoid learning from their own mistakes. Between positions 101 and 200, students can earn an allowance of 7,000 bronze coins, 1 marrow, cleansing pill per month, and the chance to compete for certain opportunities. 7,000, Lothar's eyes widened in surprise. As far as he knew, an ordinary person like him could survive with less than 400 bronze coins a month. With that, such a payment was relatively high for him. Those in the top 100 earn from 7,000 to 20,000 bronze coins, depending on their position. They also get entry to the Academy's special cultivation rooms and a guaranteed spot on any expedition or opportunity that arises. Elka finished explaining to him. Oh. Lothar looked at the top of the rankings and saw Victoria's name in the top 10. It looks like my wife is truly heavily favored here. Elka, what do I need to move up in this ranking? There is only one way. By completing missions and earning merit through that. I see. He smiled at her, liking how things worked in this place. Lothar then moved closer to her, using one of his hands to grasp the middle of Elka's back and say in her ear. At some point in the future, you will see my name in the first position of that ranking. Her face turned slightly toward his, her eyes focused on his. Is that so? Don't you think that's too high? If your expectations are too high, any trouble will affect you that much more. Facing problems is not bad. It means I'll have more ways to transform myself into my best version. What would scare me is getting a good position easily. Sometimes hearing a yes, getting what you want easily can be much worse than point-blank defeat. So, there's no sense in not chasing the number one position. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, Elka. He smiled confidently, making that woman shiver at his words. Elka then bit her lips as she noticed the confident expression on Lothar's face, feeling that although those words were absurd, this young man did not seem to be saying them out of his mouth. Elka knew that cultivation depended greatly on the age at which one began his journey. And since Lothar seemed older than her and did not emit spiritual fluctuations, she did not think he was in a position to say those words. However, his words seemed to have a different value when dictated by that unhesitating tone. At the same time, his eyes passed unprecedented confidence to her. I don't know why, but I believe you. She gracefully laughed just before waving one of her hands, calling him to continue the tour. After a while, when Elka had finally finished showing Lothar almost the entire built-up area of Sector Point 1, they walked through one of the gardens. There, students were meditating in silence or eating while having fun sitting on the grass and talking in groups. On the other hand, the natural greenery and the beautiful buildings that harmonized this environment made the people in the surrounding area feel a specific relief from the pressure of competing in this large organization. And seeing this, Lothar was reminded a little of Earth, realizing that there were similarities between this place and his homeland, although there were vast differences. Elka, thank you for your help. I feel that from now on, I can find myself in this place even without help. He said as he turned to her, standing in one of the corners of that area. She then smiled at him. You're welcome. He realized that there was no one else in his vicinity and moved a little closer to her, standing only 30 centimeters away from this woman who had a live fence behind her, preventing her from moving away from him. Lothar then took one of her hands and looked deeply into Elka's beautiful brown eyes. "Let me thank you properly." After that, he moved forward until his lips were only an inch away from Elka's. "Don't you want to?" Gulp. "Lothar, don't you think this is going too fast? You've just met me." He kept looking into her eyes, pursuing them without bothering if anyone would see the two. "What's wrong with that? We're two adults here. We're two independent individuals who naturally are not doing anything they should not be doing. The question is it worth it not to do what you want just because you just met me?" One of his hands squeezed the left side of Elka's waist, making her body shiver. "Elka, I won't take the final step. That's up to you." Her brown eyes fluttered in uncertainty as her heart leaped in her chest, making her medium-sized breasts rise and fall faster and faster. And as much as she thought this should not happen, every fiber of her body kept her from leaving that place. Lothar was pressing her against the green fence in that place, but he was not using any force, or rather, she was stronger than him and could easily pull away from him. But still, her body did not seem interested in this possibility. Instead, her pupils were dilated, and her feminine senses were heightened at this moment, almost screaming at her to do what he wanted. And how could she not be like this? Lothar was simply the most handsome man she had ever seen. Moreover, he was the only person who had ever had such confidence in court her and demonstrated his unwavering determination to her. He had not bowed to her and lost his individuality in any instant as many of her observers did while trying to please her. Besides, his sometimes unexpected behavior made her feel uncomfortable, wanting to change him. So, she could not help but feel compelled to step forward to try to tame this hard-to-read being. "Can you keep this a secret? I don't want to tarnish my reputation," she said in a low voice, thinking about her past. Lothar just smiled at her, saying nothing, watching the nervousness on that beautiful face. "Elka, decide what you want to do." Gulp. Why doesn't he answer my questions? He always does something different than I'm expecting. Ah. How annoying. She felt nervous as her body got closer and closer to Lothar's. But as she thought about those things, her hands passed behind Lothar's neck, and she finally made the final move. Chapter 14 Woman Sent. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. In that instant, Elka melted into Lothar's arms as she felt his lips, slowly allowing her womanly instincts to overwhelm her. She had no experience with it, but as she felt Lothar's movements, her body began to respond unconsciously, slowly improving the sensation of doing that. As she felt something pleasant travel through her body, she closed her eyes. She used one of her hands to massage Lothar's left cheek, ignoring the shameless way he touched her. And with that, the two of them completely ignored their surroundings, from where three young men a little younger than Elka was watching from behind the leaves of a tree. Damn! How could that bastard do this to her? One of them said in a low voice, feeling hard-to-bear envy in his heart. At the same time, a young man with black hair and sharp eyes was green with anger while between those other two as he looked at Lothar and Elka's warm kiss. BDNV, damn son of a. He must have used some cowardly trick against my Elka. How could such a beautiful and graceful woman like her be interested in an arrogant and worthless man? Unacceptable. He roared at his two followers, furious, filled with hatred at having to see the girl he liked in the arms of some nobody. To make matters worse, from Elka's gestures, the way she was kissing Lothar, and allowing him to touch her, it was clear to these viewers that she was enjoying it. And this only made them feel worse, with the urge to vomit the contents of their stomachs. Young master, what shall we do? This guy dared to touch Miss Becker. We have to do something. We can't let this go on. The other individual, tall and strong, said in a tone that carried his anger at having to see that. Those two had to make way for the black-haired young man since they were both weaker and from humbler backgrounds. But internally, they both wanted Elka as much as the young master did. Because of this, they were all irritated by Lothar's situation. The black-haired young man then said, "Find out who this damned Lothar Ritter is. I want to know if we can offend him and his weak points." After that, those young men from the same geopolitics class as Lothar left the area, their hearts beating rapidly, while the pressure in their heads made them feel sick. In any way, after 3 minutes since their departure, Lothar and Elka finally parted their lips, both hotter than before, especially the young redhead. She now had a blush all over her face, making her even more attractive. In addition, her lips were glowing to Lothar, and her breathing sounded like a melody to his ears. As for this young man, he, too, had enjoyed this little diversion. But as a man who had had countless relationships in his past life, this was no big deal to him. Therefore, his heart was much calmer than Elka's, and the smile on his face was discreet, carrying a meaning that only the two of them could understand. Gulp. In excitement, she swallowed her saliva, feeling incredible as if her blank black world had gained color overnight. "That was amazing," she said in a low voice, biting her lips, interested in this new discovery of hers. Lothar nodded, noting the silly way such a virgin woman was watching him. His current body was also a virgin, but the young man from Earth would not see himself that way. His experiences were undeniable. And with that, he did not see himself as an equal to her. "If you want, we can continue this." "Really?" Her eyes sparkled, beginning to like the idea of meeting with him. "Yes, but right now, we have to split up. I have some business I want to take care of," he said as he looked at the tip of that obelisk in the vicinity of this garden they were in. "We can see each other tomorrow. Is that okay with you?" She then clasped her hands together, looking at how he did not seem as interested in continuing this now as she was. "We still have a few minutes left. Why don't we continue?" Lothar smiled upon hearing that but did not do what she wanted. "Elka, I want you to push yourself with your studies and cultivation. Try to keep that feeling you had just now under control. If you do that, I'll show you something new tomorrow." He played with her, using her psychology to prepare her for a new play with him. He told her not to overthink what had happened, but Lothar knew that was impossible, even more so when considering that he had just promised her something else. So, how could she obey him completely? Hell, now she could not ignore thinking about what they had done. But that was precisely Lothar's interest. Really. After that, Elka quickly kissed one of Lothar's cheeks before the two parted. That woman did as she had promised him and ran towards her studies while he remained satisfied in the same place as before. Pretty good for the first day of school. He laughed, already wondering what his dear wife would think of that if she found out. "I'm sure Victoria won't be jealous of me, but I still have to get her approval to win the bet with Anneliese." Lothar had a clear plan in mind. That was to make Anneliese his trainer so that he could use his, "what doesn't kill you makes you stronger," to raise his physical power. He could naturally ask her for that now, but there was a risk that she would ignore him. After all, who would train like the way he needed? And as for asking other people, although tempting, he would not do it under any circumstances. No, how could he trust strangers with his life? Anneliese at least was his sister-in-law and would do her best not to kill him, even if she agreed to beat him to a state of near death. But other people, well, Lothar could not trust. In any case, now I should look for Anneliese. Since I cannot attend the cultivation-related facilities of this place, I will ask her for help. Lothar only had 2 classes this first day. And since the next one would still take some time to start, he wanted to find his sister-in-law to efficiently use his time here. Spending this free time with the beautiful Elka was interesting, but this had 2 fundamental problems. The first was that he wanted to tease that woman, showing her that he would not do everything she wanted, even things that were good for himself. And second, he was far behind his peers. So, he had to use his time more efficiently. With that in mind, he quickly followed the directions of the Morning Star Academy map, going to Sector Point 4. After arriving at Sector Point 4, Lothar passed through several environments where he thought he could find Anneliese. In doing so, he saw many people of his age and some arrogant looks against him. But he already expected this all. After all, the people in Sector Point 1 simply did not know him because most of them were just kids who did not know about certain Peter's city matters. Even if they were aware of the strange marriage of the most talented and beautiful woman of the local generation to a young man with no future, not everyone would associate his name and image. But for those people of the same age as him, more powerful, that is, closer to the minimum level to understand who Victoria was, well, those knew how to recognize Lothar. So, as he entered that area, Lothar just ignored the comments and cold glances in his direction, looking for the beautiful Anneliese. Lothar. After some time, finally, he heard Anneliese's sweet voice calling him as he was passing next to a small fighting arena. He looked around the surroundings looking for that woman until he came across the person dressed in the same dress as earlier today, with one of her legs being shown through the opening in her clothing. Anna, I thought it would be easier to find you here. This place is a lot bigger than I imagined. He commented as he reached her side, near other women. Seeing the look in her brother. In Law's eyes, Anneliese turned away from her friends and directed this shameless person away from there. What happened? Are you already in need of my help? She asked in doubt. But just as this young man was about to open his mouth to speak, her eyebrows frowned as she smelled a strange scent. That fragrance. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. A sharp look on her face while one of her hands was trailing towards his right wrist to prevent any attempt to escape from this scoundrel. Lothar, answer me at once. Who is the bitch? But this young man was not the type to obey when told what to do. Anna, if you are smelling any woman's scent, it must be because there were many flowers in the place where I sat earlier. You must be mistaken. He let go of one of her hands but continued to stand in front of her, watching her with a confident expression on his face. Lothar could tell Anneliese the truth, but from her behavior, he knew it was best not to assume what he had done to Elke earlier. He would do it if Victoria questioned him, but not with his sister. Law or any other person. Lothar. Do you think I'm an idiot? If you don't tell me now, I swear I'll tell my sister everything. Lothar narrowed his eyes and then used his tongue to lick his lips. Do that. Tisk. Bastard. On his first day in this place, he's already gotten some little slut. How degrading. That is a real humiliation to our family. She stood silently watching Lothar, red with anger. But since Anneliese only had her word for pressing Lothar at this instant, she did not feel she could pressure him to speak the truth if he did not want to do so. So, with that in mind, she thought of a solution to solve the problem. I will keep an eye on this ungrateful brother. Law to prevent our family name from being further degraded. I will not say anything to my sister for the time being. She then said in an irritated manner. Then what do you want with me, scumbag? Can't you see I'm busy? But Lothar did not like her tone and used one of his hands to take her left wrist and bring her closer to him. Anna, why are you so angry? You know well about my relationship with your sister. Can't you give me a break? Who do you think is more limited by this marriage? Your sister. Or me? But that woman in front of him said nothing. Instead, she just watched him with a judgmental look, still dissatisfied. Sigh. I came here because I want your help regarding spiritual cultivation. What do you want to know? Everything. The Academy does not intend to allow me to use the areas related to cultivation. Her eyes then opened in realization, recognizing this point was indeed pertinent. But you can't cultivate. So, what difference does it make for you to know that? I think you'd better use your time to learn the other subjects and get your degree as soon as possible. Only then will you be able to help our family and bring pride to my sister. Tisk. Our family. He said with a bit of irritation in his tone, but he did not lose control. Then forget it. I'll make my way to solve my problems. After that, he started walking on the path opposite her, thinking it had been a mistake to trust her. Elka can't do the same as Anneliese, but I can get something out of her. Wait. After a few seconds, Anneliese ran after him, shouting at him to wait for her. What do you want? He asked as he looked at the woman walking on his left side. Sigh. I'm sorry for saying that, Lothar. I said more than I should have. She said in an apologetic tone, understanding that she had wronged her brother. In law. She knew very well how unpleasant it was to be compared to her older sister, who was so much more talented than she was. And with that, after saying those words to Lothar, she had immediately felt bad for speaking so casually about his greatest weakness. Tell me what you want to know, and I will help you. If you can lend me your basic cultivation books, that will be enough, and I won't have to bother you once again. I'm sorry, but the academy doesn't give us those books. We have to return them once we change sectors. So, the ones I have are all from Sector Point 4. Why don't we talk about it? I'm not like my sister, but I can teach you the basics. Really? So, tell me something, how does a person know that he has reached the first transformation? Or the second? Is there something special between different levels? Upon hearing that, Anneliese tried to suppress the surprise on her face, as she did not want to offend this young man unnecessarily by implying that he was an ignoramus. Well, that's simple. Any cultivator first needs a proper cultivation technique to begin their journey. From that technique, he will naturally feel the difference between the strength of an ordinary human to a first transformation cultivator. The first stage is focused on transforming the mortal body into a spiritual body. It consists of 9 spiritual cleansings, which are basically the processes in which your body eliminates toxins and undergoes changes necessary for soul development. At that stage, each time we take a step forward, spiritual cleansing brings us benefits. Like, for example, increased vitality, physical strength, endurance, visual ability, in short, everything improves. Since this process happens 9 times, we say that the mortal warrior goes from the first to the 9th transformation. So, that's how it is. He muttered in a low voice as he remembered what had happened the night before. Does this spiritual cleansing release a stinky black goo? Oh. Yes, that's what we call impurities. She answered without paying attention to the satisfied expression on Lothar's face. Looks like I'm able to cultivate now. He celebrated internally, realizing that the system had saved him and solved his body's problems. I'm probably at first transformation. But is it possible to start cultivation without a technique? He asked. No. Let me tell you a bit of history. The first cultivation techniques were created from the intuitive procedures of cultivation geniuses from ancient times. If you want to know, the difference between today and that time is that today we have numerous techniques at our disposal, of qualities of all kinds. With them, we can start our cultivating journey immediately. But back then, a cultivator needed to understand nature on his own to be able to start his cultivation. But this procedure adopted by the past geniuses is nothing more than the primordial form of our cultivation techniques. Then how did I advance in level? Lothar wondered quietly. Is the system my technique? Or is it that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger? No. That last option is the physique, so it can't be a technique. Anna, when we talk about cultivators, what does the physique mean? Physique is not exactly the body, but the quality relative to the body. Because of this, we all have a type of physique, but it may or may not awaken, may or may not be useful in our activities. In any case, once someone awakens a physique, it naturally confers some ability to that person. Have you awakened yours? He asked in curiosity. Anneliese then shook her head negatively. It is challenging to do such a thing, and there is often a need for special resources or conditions for that to happen. As far as I know, even my sister couldn't awaken hers. Oh. A smile broke out on Lowther's face as he imagined the competitive advantage he would have because of this. So, how do I rate the level of a physique? Is there such a thing, or is there no rating? The physique rating is the same as that of spiritual cultivation. She replied as she looked at the side of Lowther's face, still walking with him through that open area of sector 4. If you ask me, the difference between physique and spiritual cultivation is the dependence on external resources. With spiritual techniques, you will depend on your soul power and those techniques to use your powers. Whereas with physique, your soul is used as fuel for its abilities. I don't need to tell you which is better, right? So, that's it. Finally, Lowther could not contain his smile and demonstrated an image to Annalise as even more attractive than he usually was. Looks like that's the benefit of the system. It can give me abilities as I gather those things. Chapter 16 And you are listening at novelfull.audio. What? Annalise smiled at Lowther, not understanding why this young man suddenly started smiling after her last words. Did I say something wrong? Nothing. I just thought what you told me was interesting. I had never thought there were such impressive things in the cultivation world. He said this as he looked mysteriously at her, making her wonder what was on his mind. But just then, he saw someone that caught his attention, and it did not take him long to say goodbye to his dear sister. In law. Anna, thank you for that information. How about we continue this conversation another time? I feel that I can learn many things by your side. Is that so? A slight redness appeared on Annalise's face, while her eyes and mouth formed a specific pattern, typical of those satisfied. That's fine. I have other things to do now, so we'll talk later. But before she could distance herself from him, Victoria's sister took one of Lowther's arms and looked him in the eye. Don't go after other women. Don't dishonor my sister. Rest assured. I just want to talk to my teacher. He was sincere as he looked in the direction of Miss Coke, who was sitting alone not far from these two. But I must say, Anna, what will your sister think if you keep sniffing me as if I were your husband? Hee, how interesting would it be if both sisters were with me? He suggested before finally moving on toward that teacher. That pig. Annalise said this in a low voice, glaring at Lowther's fleeing figure. That bastard is truly bold. He keeps talking nonsense to me. And soon, she left that place, making room for young Lowther to approach his target without further disturbance. Beautiful teacher. He said as he sat down next to that woman with black hair, fair skin, and a body proportionate for her 1.6 meters tall. Hearing that tone she had heard earlier today, Annika Koch looked at the silver-haired young man at her side, surprised to see this person here. Student Ritter, what are you doing in Sector Point 4? What do you want with me? Beautiful teacher, why are you so cold? I obviously want to talk to someone more mature. Unfortunately, that Sector Point 1 is full of children. I feel like a fish out of water in that place. He said, smiling, trying to approach this woman. Lowther was naturally someone attracted to beauty and would not pass up opportunities that showed themselves to him. But he would not bother to approach every beautiful woman that came his way. After all, in this world, the standard was so high that if he kept his principles cultivated on earth, he would not be able to control himself. But even though he had no interest in trying to get involved with every beauty in his path, he wanted to get close to some women who could help him achieve his goals. In Elka's case, this woman was an exception. Lowther just found her interesting and wanted her to have a healthy relationship in his beginning here. Dioviko and, of course, he would not just use her and discard her later. He was not so wicked. In any case, of all the other women in his life now, a number of them were very complex, with problems that would take time to solve. But in Annika's case, this woman, despite being a student at this institution, had a teaching position, which in itself was a testament to her competence. Many people in this academy stood to vie for the few teaching positions here. Still, this woman was one of the few actually to perform student and teacher roles simultaneously. And it must be said that, in this place, this was not a position despised by noblemen from the best of backgrounds. Considering this, he thought that making contact with this woman could bring him closer to specific issues about this place and someone with considerable political knowledge. Yes, considerable, since he, Lothar, was only a son in law of the Frost family, who until recently could not cultivate. As such, his position was precarious, and to approach anyone in this academy would be enough for him to learn a lot. But as a teacher in this place and someone capable of teaching geopolitics, Annika had something extra that people like Anneliese did not have. That's why he was interested in her. He could build up his intelligence network over time or even reach high enough positions for information to come naturally to him. However, Lothar was not the type to do all the work when other people could do it for him. No, if this young man was going to invest in his past life, he was undoubtedly the type to entrust his money to good companies instead of creating his own. And extending that logic to his current situation, having someone with better information than his, who already cared about staying informed, would be both the least risky and most advantageous for him. Thus, because of his interest in improving his position in this society, he wanted to bring this woman over to his side to strengthen him. She then looked at him in curiosity. And why would you think you would not be a fish out of water trying to approach me? Beautiful teacher, I naturally have an interest in the history of our vast world that cannot be found in those young people. Only by conversing with an intelligent and capable woman will I be able to share my academic passions. He said this with a deep expression on his face, looking into Annika's eyes without discomfort. Is that so? She asked in surprise, finding it unusual that this newly matriculated young man had the same interests as she did. Of course, I would never lie to you, beautiful teacher. And I already told you to call me Miss Koch. He, beautiful teacher, you can say that I will do as the rules say during classes. But out here, you and I are just two students from the Morning Star Academy. But how about that? If you tell me your name, I'll stop calling you that way. She then looked at him more closely, finding Lothar's attempt amusing. All this just to get my name. You can hear that from other students with a lot less work. I'd rather hear it directly from you. TSK. Lothar, you truly are something, huh? I almost can't believe that the first Miss Frost married someone so bold. What do you think she will think if she hears that you are flirting with women on your first day at the academy? She formed a smile on her face, revealing that she knew more about him than he thought. Oh. So, you had already recognized me. He was surprised but did not flinch. Sure, I just didn't say anything as I didn't want to harm a student by talking about his problems in public. But I must say, you're pretty fearless, huh? She looked him up and down, trying to understand where his confidence came from beside his singular attractiveness. Besides flirting with a classmate earlier today, now you do it with your teacher. Poor Miss Frost. He, beautiful teacher, it seems your eyes were watching me earlier. Or are you able to pay attention to everything your students do? Tisk. All right, I'll tell you my name just to end this disrespectfulness of yours. My name is Annika. Oh. That's a good name, Anne. He smiled, teasing her. And upon hearing the intimate way he referred to her, Annika promptly became embarrassed as she watched Lothar's silver eyes. Anne. But then, the noon bell began to ring in that academy when it was finally time for Lothar to get on with his afternoon classes. Anne, see you tomorrow. I hope I can hear some good stories from you. He said as he turned away from her, heading back to Sector Point 1. Ah, this woman will be much harder than Elke. He sighed in his heart as he realized that Annika's maturity was on another level. But that was not bad for him either. Let's see what happens in the next few days. Chapter 17 Economics and Ambush. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. After saying goodbye to Annika, Lothar spent the rest of the afternoon at the Morning Star Academy. He had gone to the economics class, only to find out what level this place was at, since he judged his knowledge in that area quite decent in his past life. He was not an expert, nor had he been someone who pursued the deeper details of that area of knowledge or its ramifications. However, as a young man who had been well educated in economics and the basic concepts involved, he had many ideas about such a thing. That would certainly have been enough in his former life for him to know how to handle his economic life, as well as to identify problems in problematic suggestions or policies. But even confidently, he had paid attention to the class he had taken and sought introductory readings about the economy in this world. Who could guarantee that this place did not have much deeper concepts than Earth? He was not sure about this, so he had made an effort to understand the economy in this society a little better. However, just as he had expected due to the memories of his predecessor, he had discovered that the economy of this place was simple. They even unconsciously used many ideas similar to those Lothar had learned on Earth. But there were no established rules, no popularized concepts to facilitate local economic development, etc. For example, he had searched in the books he read about the concepts of compound interest and future value. But at no point did he find them, drawing his attention to how backward this world was concerning something so relevant. And realizing all this, he understood that the idea of investments in this world practically did not exist. Anyone in this place would find it plausible to invest in himself, in his cultivation. After all, this was the cultivation world, the home of the individualistic and ambitious. But when it came to investing in other people or businesses, ideas became increasingly scarce. Some even unconsciously invested in other people. But this was more like something they did to leave an inheritance, as in the case of masters with their disciples, or to help a loved one protect themselves. Other than that, the idea of helping another person was counterintuitive, since that person might overtake his benefactor and eventually subjugate or betray such an individual. So, Lothar had realized that the institutions of this world were collectively weak, even considering powers with many experts. Or rather, they were a long way from reaching their own potential. After all, what would happen to, for example, a sect that had lost the most powerful experts and their disciples? The answer to this was clear. Such an organization would naturally cease to exist or wither away over time, because hardly anyone talented enough would have the best knowledge left by those people. And even if they did, such people would not be numerous, and the chance that they would die before a possible recovery of power would simply be gigantic. However, what is the point of creating something so fragile that it can't even be self-sustaining without its experts? Certainly, specialists were relevant and fulfilled essential roles. But would not it be more interesting to create something that, even weakened, can fight to survive, keeping its best characteristics? But for that, investing in more people was necessary, and that was practically not happening in this world. Having learned all this about the economy of this world, Lothar had been pleased, since this was an opportunity for him. He had notions of economics that could only be considered advanced in this society, even though this was only common knowledge where he came from. Therefore, he wanted to use this to build his financial life in this place, something necessary not only for his quality of life but also for his own cultivation. However, he was in no hurry, even with many ideas and knowledge, to accomplish this feat. No, Lothar knew that the nail that stood out was the first to be hammered. Considering this, he had to try at least to improve other of his characteristics so that he would at least be able to act without having to worry about his actions sabotaging him. He not only needed power but people and organizations capable of hiding his tracks, something necessary for someone with his intentions. And precisely because he had practically none of this at the moment, he was in no hurry and had in mind how he should act to reach the point where he could put his ideas to the test in the future. After the economics class, he had spent some time in the Sector .1 library, learning about other information necessary for his plans or simply his best experience of this world. After leaving the academy at the end of the day, Lothar immediately made his way alone to the Frost family estate. He should have returned home with Anneliese, but he had missed his schedule because of his dedication to his reading. With that, realizing that Anneliese had not had the patience to wait for him for more than an hour, Lothar had not wasted much time in that place and started on his way back. Because of his predecessor, who had wandered erratically through this city many times, Lothar knew the local map as he knew his hand. And with that, he had been left in no doubt about what to do in this situation. Peter's city was not a vast place where someone like him would need transportation to get around. That was a city about the size of the typical medium-sized cities on Earth. However, even though it was not so grand that he lost the courage to walk home, this was a walk of over an hour. So, away from the comfortable carriage that had brought him to the local academy earlier, Lothar had begun his journey, walking briskly, hurrying to reach his goal. He was still not much better than an ordinary human, so what he most wanted at this moment was to get home, eat something, and then sleep. Then, the next day he could go back to putting his plans for the future into practice. However, life was complicated, and one did not always get what one wanted. As he was returning home, Lothar was being chased by a group of 3 individuals, each with their identity covered, walking in the shadows and watching him. And for a young man who had just found himself in this dangerous cultivation world, Lothar naturally had not noticed those 3 chasing him. That had been his mistake. After a while, Lothar was almost at the Frost family estate when suddenly he found himself surrounded by 3 masked people standing at the side of an alley. In that place where there was no one nearby, and trash could be seen in some spots near old or abandoned facilities, Lothar stopped, finding the situation strange. He could not probe people's strengths, much less check certain soul-related conditions. But as he came across those people, Lothar immediately sensed their fighting intent. Who are you, people? What do you want with me? He asked in a confident tone, showing no fear in his posture. But all he heard was a distinct tongue sound. Tisk. This guy is just an aimless wanderer, but still. One of those 3 thought about it in silence as he held an 80-centimeter long stick in one of his hands. He then said in an unrecognizable tone. Let's teach this good for nothing a lesson. Let's see if he will still touch Miss Becker after we break his 2 legs and arms. The most vicious of the 3 said this as he finally jumped towards Lothar, already in a position to punch his opponent, using a metal item around his fist. At the same time, the other 2 also moved against Lothar, using their best means of action to attack Lothar's legs, arms, and groin. Shit! Lothar shouted in anger, feeling the bad luck left behind by his predecessor. Who are these bastards? Why are they attacking me? He tried to consider the people his predecessor had offended, but there were so many that he could not even think of a single one of them. But seeing the punches and other types of attacks coming at his body, he had no time to think about those possibilities. No, since he was in that position, all he could do was try to defend himself. Chapter 18 No luck. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Just before the enemy attacks hit his body, Lothar put up a defensive position, trying to imitate things he had seen on television in his previous life. When he was on Earth, Lothar had never bothered to learn any martial arts. And since his predecessor had never done anything of the sort either, he had nothing significant to use at this point. The only thing was his own body and the few fight scenes he had ever seen on television. Thus, he lowered his body slightly, putting one of his arms near his head while the other was in a lower position to defend his lower body. Simultaneously, remembering how boxers move their feet during their fights, Lothar tried to do the same. In this way, he began to dance as his opponents tried to hit him from his right, left, and front. The one on the right had a wooden stick and was quickly approaching Lothar's left knee. The one on the left had no weapon with him but was spinning in the air, while one of his feet was heading toward Lothar's left arm. Finally, the one in front was punching in the direction of Lothar's face, while he had a device in his hand that increased the damage of his blows. Take that, you scoundrel. That individual punching said this in hatred. Pow! And then, in that instant, the punch came straight against his face, as he instinctively leaned his spine back slightly and tried to protect himself from the other two attacks. To do this, he jumped into the air and directed a kick at the person who was trying to hit him from his left. He could try to do this against the one who had been trying to attack one of his knees with a stick. Still, thinking that item could hurt him even more, he decided to bet on attacking the unarmed individual. At the very least, this move could protect him from that person, while his body movement would be enough for the enemy armed with a stick to miss his knee. Therefore, as the young man who had tried to punch Lothar slowly hit the air, the silver-haired young man's body spun in the air, when finally his right shin hit the shin coming against one of his arms. Pow! Ah! Ah! Son of a bitch! At that instant, as the two young men's legs crashed through the air, cries of pain left their throats as the stick from before hit the ground. Upon realizing that situation, the two who had not been injured immediately frowned, sensing that there was something wrong with the information they received. That was because no ordinary human could ever withstand a kick from a first transformation cultivator and still cause pain to his opponent. Damn it! Those damn rats have tricked us. The young man who had thrown the last punch said this in frustration, feeling ashamed for being humiliated by mere information sellers. The one with the stick then nodded and said, "That wretch is at the peak of the first transformation." They could not sense Lothar's cultivation. However, from the way the silver-haired young man had tried to defend himself, these two knew that their enemy had used everything he had. And precisely because of this, they understood that Lothar was only a little stronger than the young man who was now screaming in pain. Otherwise, if he had been stronger, their ally would surely have had an open fracture from that crash alone. However, seeing their ally falling to the ground with that part of his body intact, the two knew that Lothar had not reached second transformation. It doesn't matter. The leader of the three said this, seeing that Lothar was looking from side to side as if trying to find a way to escape. There are three of us, and we still have weapons on our side. Come on, let's beat this wretch until he learns not to mess with other people's women. And with that said, they finally went back to attacking Lothar, only this time being much more careful since their opponent was a bit stronger than them. Shit! You bastards, I'll remember this. Lothar shouted in anger as he pressed his jaw hard, furious at being in such a ridiculous situation. But unfortunately for Lothar, even if he was a little stronger than those young men, he had two significant disadvantages here. The first was obviously the problem of his opponent's weapons, which would definitely only need to hit him once to knock him out. And the second was his experience. Lothar remembered scenes from movies that had helped him make that first move. Unfortunately, however, that success was nothing but beginner's luck. He had combined the underestimation of his opponents with the fact that his actual body was already much stronger and more agile than that of an ordinary human. Because of this, he had managed to dodge enemy attacks and still wound one of those people. But his situation had changed completely, and without his enemies underestimating him, Lothar was in trouble. Let's see how long you can hold out, asshole. Pow! Ah! After almost 3 full minutes of one-sided fighting, the three finally moved away from Lothar, leaving that bruised body on the floor, writhing in pain. At the beginning of the fight, they had some difficulties. Still, as soon as Lothar received the first attack, he had lost the focus needed for such situations. After all, he was not used to the idea of feeling pain. All his concentration had been diluted as he went through this, opening up gaps in his position for his opponents. From then on, the three enemies beat Lothar as they pleased, hitting him dozens of times on his legs and arms. They had only failed to injure the precious item of such an opponent because, in spite of everything, Lothar would never give up on his little brother. No, that part of his body was of utmost importance for someone with his personality. He would rather have every one of his bones broken than a single muscle in that region be injured. So, although they tried hard, the three failed to destroy Lothar's manhood. Finally, when they realized that people were approaching the area, they promptly withdrew, satisfied with their action. They did not aim to kill Lothar but rather to give him a fright to scare his dreams. There were laws in this city, and none of them wanted such big trouble just for an affair. So, they had been content to break Lothar's 4 limbs and leave him extremely injured in that alley, screaming in pain like a woman during childbirth. Ah! Bastards! Ah! I'm going to kill you miserable bastards! He thought this amidst his screams, unable to muster the strength to verbalize his threats. And while he was in that situation he had never imagined himself in, it was not long before curious people approached that place. Hey! Hey! Kid, can you hear me? Are you still alive? A gentleman dressed as a farmer stopped beside that bloodied body, concerned that he had witnessed someone in this situation. Oh! Lothar then made an unimaginable thrust, clenching his jaw so hard that the pain around his body seemed to be subsiding. He then said with difficulty. Frost. Esta. Estate. Frost Estate. That person asked as more curious people gathered on the outskirts, looking at Lothar as they put their hands to their mouths. Why, yes. Meanwhile, Lothar's 3 enemies had finally stopped their escape in another alley in that part of Peter's city, all satisfied with the thrill of that attack. That Warren will be a few months without showing up at the academy, ha ha ha. The tallest of the 3 said this as he removed some concealment items from his clothes. On the other hand, although he was smiling, the one who had received Lothar's initial attack did not look so cheerful. But even though we taught him a lesson, we still suffered quite a bit. He pointed to the trails of blood near the mouths and noses of his companions. But upon hearing that, the black-haired young man who had led this attack made a sound of disgust and changed the subject. That's the fault of the damned rats who sold us incorrect information. We'll deal with them another day. What about that bastard Lothar? What about him? The black-haired young man asked this with an icy expression on his face. He naturally isn't a problem anymore. With so many injuries, even if he ever walks again, my Elka will never look at him. Chapter 19 Second Transformation. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Ah! Cries of pain reverberated through one of the hallways of the building where Lothar's room was located, echoing throughout the entire floor. At the same time as this, several of the servants from the Frost family estate were in the vicinity of that room, curious about what was going on. Only 15 minutes ago, Lothar had arrived at this place being carried by ordinary citizens. Shortly afterward, one of the local doctors called by the family came to attend him, and then the screams of agony began. And since it was already night in this city, many servants of this estate who had nothing to do were in the area watching the situation in curiosity. Many of these people did not like Lothar because of the young man's unusual personality, and when they found out that he had been almost killed, many could not help but come to enjoy the scene. And just those who had arrived earlier to this part of the Frost family estate were seeing through the open door of Lothar's room this young man being tortured by a doctor. Ah! Lothar cried out in desperation once again as a woman with violet hair held him down, and the doctor dressed in a black suit used his hands to deal with the broken bones in his legs. In doing this, the doctor was constantly breaking and reshaping Lothar's bones, trying to correct the problems created by the previous accident. However, this was not comfortable. Each time the doctor used his hands, Lothar felt excruciating pain and did not even understand how he was still conscious. As a result, the young man, who had only his underwear on at the moment, was drenched in sweat while a hard described pallor spread over his entire body. Doctor, if we continue, I'm afraid he won't be able to take it. The woman with violet hair, eyes of the same color, and delicate features said this while using her hands to immobilize Lothar's upper body. But the doctor was not interested in his assistant's concerns. It doesn't matter. Doesn't it, Lothar? He asked this to the young man in agony, understanding that this was all just this patient's own choice. Finding Lothar in this place, the doctor who was attending him had told him that if he did not get this shock treatment, he could expect severe sequels in the future. But as a young man who had just started his life in this world, Lothar could not accept something so horrible. With that, Lothar had asked the doctor to do whatever it takes to at least leave his body in a state where he could recover without worrying about sequels. No matter how much he would have to suffer. And with that, the doctor continued. While Lothar was receiving his treatment, Victoria quickly moved toward her husband's room, worried that she would become a widow so early in her life. She had just finished a cultivation session when suddenly a servant brought the news that Lothar was in his last moments. Thus, she left the place where she was worried sick, while Elise followed behind her with a satisfied expression on her face. But it was not long before these two reached the side of Lothar's room, where the many servants promptly made way for the first Miss Frost. What happened here? She asked this with an icy expression, typical of her, but which at the moment seemed even worse. As for Elise, she stood watching the dying young man in that room, pleased by his suffering. You deserve it, pig. The doctor then said. First Miss Frost, I can't tell you what happened, but this young man was beaten until he had almost every bone in his body fractured. What? That's just what you heard. But rest assured, your husband should recover after a few weeks in bed. He said this mournfully, sensing that such a woman might be furious over what had happened to Lothar. Many people in Peter's City talked about the possibility that Victoria and Lothar's marriage was not consummated and therefore had no validity. But this man did not dare listen to rumors, and if his clients wanted to play strange games, he was willing to tolerate them and show his sincerity. As such, seeing the angry expression in Victoria's eyes, he did not care whether the rumors were true. Instead, he only pretends to feel sorry for her situation, especially Lothar. Upon hearing this, Victoria felt irritated, but realizing that Lothar's life was not at risk, she managed to calm down a bit. She did not like being associated with Lothar since this young man had nothing to be proud of or somewhat not be ashamed of. But for her own purposes, it was interesting to Victoria that others thought and even talked about her and Lothar as a real couple. Doctor, how is my husband doing? Looking at him from here, I feel worried. She said this, looking at the now unconscious Lothar. The doctor with the bulging belly and black mustache then laughed. Don't worry. He fainted after having his last bones reshaped by my technique. He then looked at Lothar with a certain twinkle in his eyes. But I must say, first Miss Frost, this husband of yours is kind of tough. Oh. Why? Victoria asked this as Elise looked at that doctor strangely. For a human with no spiritual cultivation, he does have quite a determination. I have dealt with many patients in my career, but I have never seen a mortal able to endure so much pain. It can't be. Elise commented in disbelief, glaring at Lothar's sweaty body. This scumbag doesn't have the guts to work on anything. How can he have such a strong will? Humph. The assistant made a disgruntled sound, thinking that such a servant woman was talking about things she did not know. Are you doubting my master's words? Elise was about to say something, but Victoria beckoned her to be quiet, and she was quick to obey. Anyway, I thank you for attending to us so promptly, Dr. Snee. I hope to see you in a different situation next time. Victoria said this as she handed over a small coin bag, paying for that man's service. See you. The night quickly gave way to daybreak in the blink of an eye, with the first rays of light penetrating Lothar's room through the small window there. And amid his dimly lit room, Lothar slowly demonstrated the signs of a person about to awaken as he moved his body and expressed disgust on his face. But still half drowsy, he could not be sure what the problem was. No, in the dream he was having, all he felt was a set of two sensations. One felt as if he was floating in a sea of goo, making him feel a grotesque sensation. But at the same time, a smell of carrion was reaching his nostrils, making his face twitch. What the fuck is that? He muttered unconsciously, feeling that something was odd. As he opened his eyes, Lothar quickly raised his upper body, sitting up in the middle of his bed as he looked down. What the foo? He said this without realizing it, finally understanding where the strange smell in his room was coming from. But as he thought more about what had happened to him, the smell and sensation of that goo slowly faded from his mind while a smile formed on his face. It works. I can rely on the, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Name. Lothar Ritter, Physique. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, Bloodline. Cultivation. Level 2, STR, 2.1, Con. 1.2, Dex. 2.1, AGI. 2.9, Int. 30, Per. 11, Will. 38, Incredible. He looked down at his two hands, feeling an impressive power. Ha ha ha, I've reached second transformation. He celebrated loudly, smiling like never before in his life, not feeling the slightest bit of discomfort in his body. However, while feeling happy, he suddenly realized that some of his attributes had not increased with his advancement. Why did this happen? Is there some special condition? But as he thought about it further, he quickly realized that the improved attributes mainly were related to his physical constitution. On the other hand, of his non-physical attributes, only his will had improved after his previous advancement. Got it. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, affect my body because it suffered from the previous injuries. He thought about it in silence. As for the mental attributes, they probably won't evolve in that same way. At least that should be true for intelligence and perception. As for the will, maybe it was affected because I endured the beating medical treatment. He wondered doubtfully. But this is amazing. Not only did I increase my strength, but I recovered remarkably quickly. I wonder if that was something done by the doctor. Or maybe it's related to my advancement. Maybe it's a characteristic of my physique. But without much knowledge of cultivation, Lothar put those thoughts aside for the moment and got up to go to the bathroom. Well, yesterday I learned a fundamental lesson. I don't know how to fight. He muttered, making up his mind to seek the correction of this significant problem. Well then, today I will continue with my plans and try to find someone to teach me combat techniques. Chapter 20 Lucky Man, you are listening at NovelFull.audio. As Lothar finished bathing in his room, Elise suddenly opened the door of that place with an expression that carried anger and the typical grace of those before playing tricks on other people. She genuinely did not want to have any contact with a scumbag like Lothar. Still, today Victoria had ordered her to come to this place and observe his situation. For this, she felt anger. However, as much as she disliked checking on the condition of the only good for nothing in this family, she could not help but consider taking advantage of the situation to play with him. Since she was already in hell, then why not find a benefit from this place? And precisely because of that, she had a silly smile on her beautiful face. Let's see what I do with you today, scumbag. She pondered while entering that room. However, as she came face to face with the bed that took up almost the entire space of that place, Elise frowned her eyebrows in shock and surprise. Lothar. Where is he? She wondered doubtfully, not understanding how he was not here. Considering Lothar's situation the night before, he should be lying down, feeling pain all over his body. So, how come he was not around? She then considered the only plausible thing. Did someone take him from this place? But as she walked in, she smelled a horrible odor coming from the bed, which had no sheet at the time, only a sizable wet mark with the design of a human silhouette. What is that odor? What happened here? She wondered but could not find any hypothesis in her mind. But that was not surprising. After all, upon entering his bathroom, Lothar had taken all the dirty sheets and thrown them in the trash. So, only the remaining odor of his body's impurities and sweat remained on that bed. And without seeing such evidence, Elise could not assume that such an odor was related to the advancement Lothar had recently undergone. Well, I have to get back. She was thinking of something when she heard a strange sound coming from the bathroom and promptly assumed a fighting stance. Lothar was gone, and Elise knew that such a situation could not be the Frost family's doing. Otherwise, Victoria would not have ordered her to come to this place. So, she immediately thought the worst, not finding Lothar in this place and hearing a strange noise coming from the bathroom. Pa! She used part of her strength to kick the closed door of that bathroom, quickly making her way into it. Oh! But upon entering that place, Elise came face to face with Lothar, who at the moment was utterly naked while using a white towel to dry his hair. And seeing that, Lothar was surprised by the unexpected visit of this woman, who was now looking at his crotch strangely. Gulp! He heard a distinct sound as this woman looked at his little brother, who was almost as big as a grown man's forearm. After a few seconds in silence, Elise suddenly returned to her rationality and shouted at him. You beast! How can you stand in such a shameful way in front of me? I was taking a shower inside my bathroom with the door closed. How do you think I would be? He asked in a provocative tone, looking with interest at that blushing woman. That. She did not know what to say, feeling that there indeed was a mistake here. And as she took a glance at Lothar's exposed body part, she felt she should not be there and simply ran away, ignoring the mission Victoria had passed her. As for Lothar, he continued doing the same as before that woman's forced entry into his bathroom, wondering what he would do next. Well, my dear wife came to visit me last night, concerned about my situation. I feel I must lessen the fear in her heart. He smiled, remembering Victoria's conversation with the doctor who had attended him. At the time of Victoria's visit, Lothar was passed out. However, he had heard all the comments made by the people inside his room. Hence, he was interested in seeing his stunning wife, perhaps using this opportunity to get closer to her. After dressing, Lothar quickly made his way toward the part of the Frost residence where the patriarch's family lived. And knowing the way to Victoria's room, he immediately reached that place. Pa. He knocked twice on the door of her room, waiting outside with a smile on his face and dressed in a typical suit for young people of his age in this world. What do you? Victoria opened the door already saying something, but upon seeing the person standing there, she immediately fell silent, with her mouth slightly open and a strange look on her face. Lothar! How can you be here? You should be in bed. She said this as she advanced against him, quickly grabbing one of this young man's wrists. Dear, if you want to touch your husband's body, you don't have to be so hasty. We can do it slowly. He whispered to her as he watched her check his condition. But Victoria was so surprised by Lothar's sudden recovery that she did not even mind his comment. She then muttered in disbelief. Your body looks in excellent condition. After saying that, she pulled Lothar into her room and closed the door. She then placed him against one of the side walls there, watching him cautiously. What have you done? How did you recover from so many injuries so quickly? I don't know. He said earnestly. There was no reason for him to try to give Victoria a better answer than that. He would not be able to convince her of anything anyway. After all, he understood nothing of spiritual cultivation, the only possible explanation for his recovery. And while it would be interesting for him not to be in this current position, he had no choice but to confront Victoria. That was because even if he tried to hide, the Frost family would find out about his miraculous recovery. But he did not want to waste time in this place pretending to be in bed. So, he could only try to deal with the situation head-on by showing Victoria his unexpected recovery. Don't you know? Lothar, this explanation is not good enough. She spoke in a louder tone, slowly approaching him. Nobody recovers like that without something significant having happened. Speak the truth. He then clenched his fists in frustration but did not back down against this woman. Instead, he stepped forward to stand even closer to her. Victoria, how could I explain something I don't understand myself? I woke up feeling a little better, despite the pain in my arms and legs. He made some gestures, indicating where he felt pain. I thought maybe you or that doctor had given me some powerful medicine. But it seems that wasn't the case. She took another step forward, standing only 20 centimeters away from Lothar. "You're hiding something." He then opened his arms and said with a serious expression. "Whether you believe me or not is up to you, dear. I'm right here. Why don't you show me this impressive talent of yours that everyone talks about and find out what happened to me?" After hearing this, her eyes sharpened, but she did not know what to do. Lothar's cultivation was still non-existent. There was no remnant of medicine or pills in his body other than those used by the doctor the night before. Other than that, apart from the recovery itself, nothing justified his sudden recuperation. Finding no hint of it, Victoria felt a slight disturbance in her mind. Was that truly a miracle? Maybe he has a special constitution that helps him recover quickly. The day before, he looked pretty good when he left for the academy with my sister, even considering he was hit by a carriage the day before yesterday. Sigh. She sighed in defeat, finally retracting her aura, which inexplicably did not affect Lothar. "It seems you have more luck than I had imagined." "Well, I'll let it go this time, but if something strange like that happens again, I hope you have a good justification for me. Now, since you are healed, get to the academy before you miss the day's first class."